And by the way, for those of you who are just joining us, we will be starting at the top of the hour in about 1 minute. So if you do have questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A window. We also do have the chat window available if you'd like to chat with each other. Go right ahead. And once again, thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is Justin Miller, and we are here for streaming challenges in optimization needs. Tracy, if you want to begin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Tracy Ruther. I'm the content marketing manager at Wowza, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. So once again, I want to thank everybody for joining us for this webinar on streaming challenges and optimization needs. If we can go ahead to the next slide, we're going to start off by taking a look at the agenda. So we're going to kick off with some brief introductions of the panelists and an overview into the research we conducted for this webinar. And then we're going to deep dive into the pain points that we identified and some tactics for addressing those. So specifically, we'll be taking a look at speeding up deployment, architecting solutions to scale, addressing latency concerns, and then on a somewhat more philosophical note, striking a balance in the build versus buy debate. So today we should have about 45 minutes of content, and we will be answering incoming questions throughout the presentation. So if anybody with questions could go ahead and enter them into the Q&A window. We'll be selecting questions that are relevant to the topics we're talking about. So be sure to kind of riff off of the discussion if you want to have your question picked. I believe that's all the logistics. Justin, do you have anything else you wanted to cover, or should we get started? Okay. So our panelists joining me today are Tim Dougherty, our Director of Sales Engineering, and Chris Cross, General Manager of Professional Services. And we also have Justin Miller making sure that everything's working in the background. So thank you, Tim, Chris, and Justin for joining me today.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Hi, Tracy. Happy to be here. Looking forward to chatting it up about streaming this morning.
Awesome. So we're going to go to the next slide. I just wanted to give everybody some background into this webinar. We conducted some research over the course of March and April of this year. Wowza teamed up with Help Me Stream Research Foundation, which is headed up by Tim Siglin, a name you're all probably familiar with on streamingmedia.com, the Wowza blog, and all kinds of other streaming resources. And really, we wanted to gauge the extent of streaming deployment challenges in the online video industry and see how we could help solve those for our customers. And so once we sorted through all the data, we had more than 250 qualified responses and produced a 20+ page report, which I see Justin's just provided the link to that report into the chat window. And so that's what we'll be providing kind of an overview of, is the most interesting takeaways we found over the course of this research. And we can go to the next slide. So I want to start off by looking at the industry demographics of our survey participants. And as you can see in this graph, there's just a huge spread of everybody from video surveillance and healthcare to live auctions and gaming. And some of the better represented industries include, of course, media and entertainment, event production. But even so, the first takeaway here is that streaming media capabilities have really become essential across a range of industries. And this is why streamlined development is a top concern. Essentially, with video finding its way into every industry, there are organizations who maybe streaming isn't their core competency, but they still want to integrate this capability into what they're doing. And this is where professional services comes into play. So I'm going to have Justin launch a poll asking what your biggest streaming challenge is when it comes to deploying a live streaming solution in-house. And then hand it off to Chris and Tim to discuss kind of the prominence of video across so many industries and some interesting use cases they've seen.
And that being said, I'm going to just leave this poll up for, let's say, another 30 seconds here, and then we'll jump to the next screen that shows the results of the polls that we've had.
Great. Well, one thing I'm thinking about, and it's highlighted in what you just mentioned, Tracy, is streamlining the deployment of video. It's not an uncommon resource to find places to send a live stream online. There are platforms like YouTube and Facebook. In fact, we're using both of those this I want to say this morning, but I want to respect other time zones. Today, we're using YouTube and Facebook and also Wowza to facilitate this stream. But each one of these resources have different nuances and some drawbacks and some opportunities. And one thing that you'll see when you're using a platform like Wowza is, yes, we can streamline this by making sure that you're not having to necessarily compromise as much as you might when you're using a YouTube Live or, you know, some more specific service. You can come to Wowza and say, I want a streaming platform that does this. And we can design that for you, put that together in a way that you're really happy with it. And then the streamlining, I think, really comes into play because we can build it for you as well. So you're not having to scratch your head every time you go live or wonder if this aspect of your platform is going to, you know, be a problem today. You can just dive right in and use a service that is essentially tailored for your specific requirements.
Yeah, frequently, Tim, I would say that, you know, there's a trade-off between easy and fast and really owning the experience that customers want to give to their viewers, their audience. And what we try to do from a Wowza perspective is provide something that's customized and something that is tailored to the customer's requirements. So to your point, Tim, you know, they don't have to compromise and get a suboptimal experience for their viewers in order to get to scale or in order to implement something quickly. You know, our objective is to meet customers' requirements, to give customers the optimal experience while delivering it as quickly as possible, especially if we're responding to something like the pandemic, where we might have to scramble and pivot and do things quickly. So, you know, I think, Tim, your point of no need to compromise is a very important one. Where, you know, you can have an experience for your viewers that is tailored, that is customized, but at the same time, you know, can be implemented quickly and can be implemented in a way that is in line with customers' financial requirements and user requirements.
Awesome. So as you can see here, we put up the top streaming challenges that we identified during the survey. And it looks like the poll that Justin just deployed, there was a lot of correlation. Specifically, what we found that was echoed in the poll was that speeding up deployment is the #1 reason organizations are considering professional services. And we can see here that architecting solutions to scale came in close second. I think in our audience poll just now, it was actually tied, followed by addressing latency concerns. And so we'll be discussing all three of those today. But to start off, Tim and Chris, do you have any initial thoughts on why deployment speed is such a high priority concern, and especially, as you mentioned, Chris, in light of the pandemic and some other trends like that have been going on?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Tim, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Chris. I was waiting for you to speak up anyway, so go for it.
It's interesting. So, clearly the last 4-5 months have been very disruptive, very interesting in lots of terrible ways, of course. But from a streaming perspective, we've seen a range of customers, many of whom were already utilizing video streaming in context of their workflow. Obviously, education would be a good example. Online education and remote learning have been in place for quite a while. Certainly, we found that with the pandemic, that went from a subset of the learning structure to the majority of the learning structure. And so depending on how different government, state, local, national were responding to what was happening with COVID-19, we found that suddenly people had, instead of months or years to determine a strategy for remote learning and live streaming, or in the case of enterprise communication, having a remote workforce that might be voluntary and might be a subset of employees, to suddenly having everybody remote and all students remote and remote medicine. It became a forcing function that did not give the luxury of time. And so whether it was organizations that were already utilizing streaming and had to scale up, or organizations that had never done streaming and suddenly had to either not do business. So in the case of a customer who does in-person trade shows and business events, they had never done streaming. And suddenly they could either go out of business or they could move to a completely remote and live video workflow. So in all of those cases, we've engaged with these customers to help them, sometimes in a panicked mode, really respond and build and create something that either had to grow quickly or something that did not exist prior to our engagement with them, and quickly build something that would support their business.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about an example of that. There's a particularly large, nationally recognizable, it's a household name, a healthcare organization. And as soon as the need for everyone to be remote, and we're talking tens of thousands of employees, their previous Wowza system, which they knew how to use, they had on site. And the reason I'm mentioning it is they understood the time it took when they built that initial X number of server build out. They had a multi-server enterprise on-prem streaming solution that was powered by our software. Well, they immediately were overwhelmed with the fact that all these employees are not going to really be able to access that on-prem solution through their VPN. It's going to oversaturate their network. They're going to have all kinds of problems. So they came to us in somewhat of a panic. These are professional, very smart individuals recognizing that there was kind of a tsunami of network requirements coming their way. And we were able to, in a very quick manner, get them set up with a cloud-based solution that leveraged a CDN. They were using some technology that it's commonly known as split tunnel VPN. And basically, they can all be secure. They can log on to their secure network with all of their on-prem servers. But when there's a request to a CDN, they can, using token authentication, of course, encryption, they can connect to a global CDN that we provide. And then that network load is taken care of. And it came out phenomenally well. They're happy. It's working very efficiently. And I'm proud of that. I'm talking about it because I was personally involved with it, but I'm proud of it because in a very short period of time, and you have to understand, large companies with thousands of employees, they don't make decisions overnight. There's a lot of critical thinking and planning that goes into, changing infrastructure like this. But we were able to do this so fast. And we were able to use resources that we have available, and we're really good at operating. So it was a great example how a big ship at sea, that's how I like to look at it, they were able to very quickly change course and begin using a resource that we helped build to meet a significant need.
Awesome. And kind of in relation to that, a question just came in Are CDNs really needed in today's tech age is the question. And I think also how can customers leverage CDNs while also balancing quick deployment speed?
Can you repeat the first part of the question, Tracy? I didn't.
Are CDNs really needed in today's tech age is the question.
Well, let me answer that. And it's a real quick answer. Yes, absolutely. A CDN is a system of caching data to a global scale. So prior to a CDN, you would have to literally deploy your own server hardware, virtual or on-prem, and you'd have to manage this exponentially growing number of server implementations globally if that was your requirement. Whereas a CDN, they're able to manage that for you, and that's what they're really good at. Wowza is very good at directing and transcoding and managing and ingesting. We are really a central hub for video streaming, but it is fantastic to take our software and push it out into a CDN, which is essentially what Wowza Streaming Cloud does. We have the one-stop solution for that. We have all of the media server technologies, but we also provide and have expertise in CDN. So I would say, without question, a CDN is a critical component in today's day and age.
And Tim, I'd like to, I guess, add on to that, which is to observe that most CDNs, the majority of CDNs globally, are actually utilizing Wowza technology under their hood to distribute and to deliver live video. So it's one, as Tim indicated, can build one's own CDN utilizing Wowza, or one can leverage a CDN of choice to deliver content on a global scale without having to invest in creating a massive and global infrastructure to gain that reach. And of course, with the CDN, that allows for solving the broad distribution component of streaming, if broad distribution is a requirement for that streaming requirement, in a way that can be done quickly and efficiently without having to invest in creating a large scale infrastructure that the customer has to manage.
And just to touch base on this, someone is asking, what is a CDN? So let's make sure people know what we're talking about.
Well, that's a fair question. It stands for Content Delivery Network, and that's effectively what it does. It's a service, typically a enterprise class company, a very large company with lots of resources, with lots of smart people, and they specialize in getting data out to large groups of people all over the world. It supports images, it supports media files, and in our case, we distribute through a CDN using what we call chunks, which are little tiny pieces of media. So it really is a caching mechanism where they can dynamically. So let's say, for example, you're streaming from Columbus, Ohio, and you have a viewer in Portland, Oregon. The CDN can dynamically allocate resources in Portland when somebody connects. And so that person is getting a really, really good local viewing experience with good speed. And you only have to send it to the CDN input point, which could be in Cincinnati, because the CDNs have different places to take in video. And then they can, in a very expert way, get it out pretty much wherever they have services.
Yeah, it's basically a giant network of high bandwidth communications and servers that manage the load of caching and delivering content of any type. And some CDNs are more local, some CDNs are global. But at the end of the day, it's a content delivery network, and it's designed to take a piece of content from Bangalore to Moscow in a very efficient way.
And since we're still talking about CDNs, I just wanted to reference another person is asking a question about eCDNs versus an internet CDN. What can Wowza do for me on premises inside the firewall?
Great question.
Well, you want to answer that one, Chris?
I'll start, and then you're smarter than me, so you can
not true.
Give more detail. So yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, a CDN is more of a public content delivery mechanism, and there are industries that less appreciate or are more restrictive as it relates to operating and delivering content of any type on the public internet. And so, we do have customers who have essentially built, as we talked about earlier, their own CDN by deploying servers and deploying connectivity between those servers in data centers, again, globally potentially, or within a certain region, within a firewall. And, again, we have customers who have built their own CDN within their firewall so that they can get content in a very controlled and very secure way to the people that need to see that content, who are authorized to see that content. Think like government and healthcare. Certainly these are customers and streaming solutions that don't tolerate a low level of security. And so we do have customers that build their own CDN using Wowza. And that's a part of and very much a component of what we've helped with professional services to make sure that customers can do something that is challenging. Building a CDN is not a trivial matter. And so it can be done. It can be done on Wowza. Many customers do that. And that is one consideration when thinking about how quickly one can deploy a solution and how complex that solution needs to be. And high security definitely makes it more of a challenge. And building one's own CDN using Wowza is a possibility, and many customers have done it. Tim, I'll let you say smarter things.
Come on. It sounds like they asked about on-prem versus internet-based, Justin. That was kind of what I heard in that question. And just the real quick answer on it is, if you don't have to go out to the internet to get your video, and you have a large population, say 500 people in a brick and mortar building who all need to watch the same stream, it's much better to deliver that over your local switchgear from a local server, because then you're not having to go across the internet to get anything. And I think that's one of the primary advantages to building your own CDN on-prem. You can also control what's going on across your WAN links. So if you have a building in Phoenix and a building in Dallas, you can send them 2 megabits per second while your local people are watching full HD at maybe 5 or 6. So, I think the advantage is just simply you being able to manage the local networking resources. And then, of course, as Chris mentioned, the security is incredible because you've already invested in these firewalls and all of these network security policy. So you can maintain all that behind your firewall without necessarily having to expose anything to the internet.
Awesome. I think we need to move forward due to the time constraints here. So let's just jump to the next slide, if that's okay.
Go to the next slide. And so just to get back to the speeding up deployment topic, we just included a testimonial here. This is from a live commerce customer that we were working with, which is basically the fusion of live streaming and e-commerce. And they were creating a mobile app for users to buy items via live streaming. And they engaged Wowza professional services to help speed up deployment. And really, I just included this here because for them, it wasn't just essential to employ professional services for deployment speed, but this was critical to delivering value to end customers. They'd already committed to a launch date. And by really outsourcing some of that development, they were able to accelerate time to value. And this also helps a lot of organizations be more agile, as we've discussed, in this COVID world where you needed a solution in place yesterday. This is where kind of outsourcing some of this expertise is really helpful. So we can keep moving, or if anybody has anything to say on this slide, they can jump in.
I just want to say it's really fun to be able to leverage the broad experience of our engineering team and our solution engineering team to be able to take something that we've learned over time or take expertise and insert it into somebody's application and really speed things up. It's incredibly rewarding for everyone involved.
And we did have a question previously come in via email that relating to this. They wanted to know exactly how the umbrella of professional services helped to speed up deployment.
Yeah, well, that it really is. I'll use that example I had earlier. You have a company that understands streaming. They know what they know, and they know that they don't know everything. And coming to Wowza, the umbrella of our services, when we sit down with someone to talk about ProServe, we're starting with a blank canvas, and you can quickly realize which product matches where. how best to apply it and when. So we're able to leverage everything from our Clearcaster encoder appliance, our Wowza Streaming Cloud and CDN capabilities, our very, very well-established Wowza Streaming Engine product line. We have quite a variety, including even mobile SDK technology. We have a lot in our tool bag to grab from. So when you're dealing with Wowza, it's very likely that we'll be building 100% of everything using our products and services. And so, I think the umbrella, if you will, is probably something that is very much to our advantage, because you're dealing with an inside team. We know our product. We've been supporting it for years and years. We have decades of combined streaming experience. So, I think it's a safe bet, at least to talk to us, even if you're considering some sort of streaming implementation, because we've been there, we've seen it, we've been in every imaginable streaming use case. And so I think we have a lot to offer under that umbrella.
Yeah, certainly there's a broad spectrum of customers that we work with and technologies that we work with, as well as, so as an example, we have customers who have been in media and entertainment, broadcast video for years, very familiar with video delivery, all the way from, the camera and the local production, all the way out to the distribution of that video through whatever technology. And then we work with companies who do medical, and they're very good at medical technology and medical capability, probably a little less streaming capability, streaming expertise within those companies, right? So we have a spectrum of companies with whom we work. And for many of those companies, streaming is something that's new, and video may not be new, but streaming and the distribution of video through the streaming technologies is new. And it's not as we've found, as we try it, obviously we're a streaming company and we hire people who are experts in streaming. There's not a ton of those people out there and available. It's a fairly specialized knowledge set, skill set, and experience set. And so, our objective is to not force, let's say, a medical company to become streaming experts. Our objective is to let them remain medical device experts, remote surgical experts, and we will help them with the streaming side, so that they don't have to invest in creating a whole new organization and hiring a staff of people who are experts in streaming. We help them with that.
Awesome.
Go ahead, Dustin.
Oh,
Okay.
no, I'm just moving it to the next slide for you.
So to take a look back at that initial ranking of streaming challenges, now we want to dive into architecting solutions to scale, which was the second highest priority. And really what we found in this research was that building scalable solutions has been increasingly vital due to the realities of COVID-19. I just think about Netflix having to decrease the bitrate of their streams across Europe because they didn't have enough capacity with all of the demand, with everybody staying home. And so really what we found was that even organizations that were super well versed in streaming and delivering this content at scale, accommodating just the vast increase in viewership became super vital when we were conducting this research, which was over March and April of this year. And so I'd like to open it up to Tim and Chris, like any customers that you saw coming in who were really having to answer that need for great scale, and how Wowza was able to help solve for that.
Sure. The model of using an on-prem versus CDN plays in, and we've covered that a lot. So the video producer or the business unit who's responsible for that suddenly realizes they've got to take on scale. So we've talked a lot about CDN and moving from on-prem potentially to a CDN, and I think we've described that pretty well. But one thing I'm thinking about in addition to that is the visibility of the video platform. In some cases, a enterprise video program would be all hands, maybe every few months or even every month they get together and they meet with the leaders of the company. And, it's a nice folksy kind of thing in some respects. And I don't mean to use that term loosely, except to describe that it's just been kind of a nice to have. now in an environment where you have all of your employees working remotely, there's an incredible change in work style. And there's an incredible adjustment that people are having to go through. Using the video medium in that capacity is critical to getting messaging out, to, you know, safety messaging having to do with COVID-19, business directives, challenges. And think about think about the challenges that all these companies have had in adapting to this economy. I mean, there's just this incredible need to communicate. And at the other extreme, everybody's at home. So the visibility and criticality of the video medium has gone up incredibly. So the person who's responsible for that is now forefront. They're in the hot seat at all these meetings. And so when we're talking about reliability and we're talking about, you know, things like managing bandwidth to scale, and when you're talking about, you know, encoding and the quality and the reliability, you know, if you start buffering when you're listening to your VP of HR tell you about some very important procedure or something that has to do with safety, you can't have that. So when you're dealing with Wowza, there's a support mechanism. There is a knowledge inside and out of what's happening from, we like to say, glass to glass, from when it goes into your camera all the way through the encoder, through the networks that support, up through a CDN. We know and we have a lot of information on measuring that and troubleshooting that. So, you know, I'm getting kind of far along in my statement here, but I do believe that the criticality and the visibility of streaming, particularly in enterprise, has gone up to a tremendous level compared to how it was before we went into the COVID-19.
And Justin, if you could go to the next slide. We also had survey respondents write in their individual projects. And of course, it was everything from virtual trade shows and music festivals to even funeral streaming, a pretty niche use case that became something that people absolutely needed over the past few months. And we can see that the majority of participants were in the live event streaming space, but we also have interactive video experiences for things like fitness, because people were no longer able to go to the gym, and all kinds of really unique applications. So if anybody on this webinar would like to describe some of the streaming projects that they've been working on as a result of COVID-19 by typing it into the chat box, that would be really wonderful. As far as virtual trade shows or virtual remote learning or commencement ceremonies, have you guys had any experience powering that? Chris and Tim?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. I'm watching the chat window, hoping that. All right, I see Adam says he's in the live event distribution category. You know, I mean, I guess to voice it over. I mean, certainly in these uncertain times, you know, in-person live events essentially went away, or have been extremely diminished. And so, you know, it's not surprising whatever. That, you know, now I'm looking at Peter's response. So galas, graduations, annual meetings, lectures. You know, one example that I was involved in that was interesting is University of Colorado Boulder had to hold their commencement ceremonies, their graduation ceremonies. They had to pivot very quickly because it was all kind of happening in real time. And, you know, we assisted them in ensuring that they could have a remote event for graduation that was going to be you know, a high quality event. That, you know, it's an educational, prestigious institution, and you know, they wanted to have an event that was at a level of quality that they felt honored the graduates and the families. And so, you know, and all of this had to happen very quickly and at scale. Of course, typically they would have a huge arena filled with people celebrating all of these graduates, and suddenly that audience was all remote. I'm seeing other worship services for sure, right? We had, you know, remote worship has been a common component of and segment for Wowza for a long time, but suddenly we went from having a subset of worshipers remote to having everyone remote. And so again, that's both a timing and a scale response that not everybody was prepared for. we were able to help with that. So.
And
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say from the Q&A window, there are other people who are mentioning projects like mixing live video into lectures with textbook material also.
One thing I like to differentiate is you have collaboration and you have production when it comes to these live event streams. And right now we're using Zoom, phenomenal tool for collaboration. We can see each other, we can share content. It's all very integrated. But people who produce events, they have more of an artistic, a very high quality approach to this. And one thing I'm seeing is people use 2 channels when they're doing virtual trade shows. And I'm even more thinking about virtual venues where you could have a group of experts on the stage, maybe half a dozen people that want to interact, but they want to produce that not with a tiled Zoom presentation. They actually want to have cameras switching, camera 1, camera 2. When someone's speaking, it's a full 16:9 frame. So they're actually using the Zoom environment as a back channel. Everyone interacts there. And then they'll use a second video channel using SRT, which is a very it's a protocol that's very resilient. You can send video all over the place and it really holds up well. It deals with packet loss. And so they'll send the high quality video back and decode it and have someone mix it like a regular TV station. And so that kind of innovation, that kind of leveraging of something like Wowza to keep the quality high, the bit rate high, the error likelihood down, in combination with something like Zoom to keep that interaction going in the background, it's phenomenal what people have done to enhance their live events, maintain that production quality, but also on the back channel have the interaction.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth mentioning that we also offer live event support for just that peace of mind during the actual broadcast, which can definitely come in handy. Awesome. So we can go to the next slide, Justin.
Sorry, I'm on mute as usual. I think we're getting other questions sort of related to what you've just been talking about in terms of, yes, people are looking for conferencing platforms like Zoom, where, right now, not only are we using this just to have a 4-way communication between us as well as share slides, but then we're streaming out to YouTube, to Facebook, to another site in order to be able to view it in multiple locations using Wowza Streaming Cloud. And people are interested in these kind of integrations between the conferencing platforms like this, or even maybe using, and I'm getting questions about this specifically, ways of using WebRTC for the same purpose.
Sure. So I guess I'll start, Tim. I'll let you keep me smart. So, definitely, a tool like Zoom is very good for live meetings, real-time interaction. Similarly, using Wowza, customers could leverage WebRTC to also create, that very low latency interactive communication. Depending on the requirements of the solution, while WebRTC is great for interaction, great for small groups, great for real-time communication, potentially depending on the scale and the geographical distribution of the audience, it might be better, as Tim had kind of indicated earlier, to take that interaction, mix it, do some production with that, and then convert that to something like HLS or low latency HLS, which can go through a CDN and could reach an audience of tens of thousands or even millions at scale. So, there's lots of ways to solve for this. And, we obviously want to use the tools that are available to their best utility. And so, there's a lot of opportunity and ability to mix and match technologies as well as tools and capabilities to really optimize for the type of experience that the customer wants to deliver to their viewers. And so, in this case, to your point, Justin, we're using Zoom for the direct interaction, but we're also broadcasting this out through Wowza technology, through other technologies, to make sure that we have as accessible an event as possible.
Yeah, you got to understand, you have to understand that WebRTC is scalable as to the extent of how many servers you want to deploy globally. You're not going to be using WebRTC through a CDN. The inversion of that is a CDN is super reliable. It automatically scales and you can maintain high quality. So my suggestion is pay for the interaction. Use WebRTC, use tools like Zoom, BlueJeans, others to create that sub 1 second interaction that's critical to spontaneous communication, but then scale out through a CDN using a technology like Apple HLS, which is very standard, very reliable, very universally compatible. So there is a balance to it. We can completely design that into your solution. And by the way, while we're talking about latency, when you're going through a CDN, you're subject to the chunk duration, essentially, those little media files that get distributed. You're subject to that 10-second specification. We can break that spec and make it a 2-second. So instead of sending 10-second files out, we're sending 2-second files out. And in the context of latency, that can get you down around 8 to 12 seconds versus 20 to 35, 40 seconds. And that low latency versus ultra low latency is a very good compromise for reliability. And honestly, you don't want tens of thousands of people really interacting anyway. So the interaction really is about those involved in the live broadcast. And I know we could break out use cases and go all sorts of different directions, but for sake of what I'm trying to describe here, use the CDN to get out to the masses. Use WebRTC and ultra low latency to facilitate that interaction.
Awesome. And just to touch a little more on that, Tim, when you were talking about it, you had mentioned in the past using SRT as part of that whole workflow. Where does SRT fit into that?
Well, I'm in my office right now, and of course I'm on a webcam, but if I wanted to set up a professional camera, connect it to my Clearcaster using SDI and broadcast it at almost 4K or maybe 1080p, I'm not going to do that over Zoom. I don't know what Zoom's doing. I don't know what protocol they're using. I can broadcast SRT, which can handle, around 2% packet loss. So if my network gets horrible, if a kid down the street starts downloading a bunch of music and the whole neighborhood goes down, SRT can adapt to that to a point. So I can send full 1080p, 60 frames per second back to you, Justin, in Denver. You can decode it, put it into your video mixer, and then the output of that video mixer can go into a CDN. It can go into a low latency network. So, SRT is within arm's reach, especially if you're using Wowza, and you can have incredibly high quality. It's almost like using a satellite uplink. It is safely a comparison to that. So I can send pro grade, high quality video through SRT and feel good about it, feel comfortable about it. And that's kind of the variation. We're talking like pro grade versus, utility, which is effectively what we get with a lot of these off the shelf turnkey products.
Right, sort of professional versus consumer.
Totally, yeah.
All right, so we've touched on latency, but what we found when we drilled into the responses in the survey we conducted was that latency is a higher priority initiative for those who've already launched a streaming solution in comparison with those looking to put a solution in place. And really, this doesn't come as much of a surprise. We see it as a natural progression. Once a company's successfully deployed their streaming solution and they've addressed privacy concerns and all of that, then latency's maybe the next biggest hurdle to tackle. But that said, we would caution at Wowza that really, unless you need low latency streaming, there's no point in prioritizing it over reliability and cost efficiencies, since low latency workflows often introduce additional complexities. So Tim and Chris, if you want to speak to that a little bit, I know that Tim, you regularly caution companies to really consider latency as far as their actual use case goes.
Well, yeah, we need to be the voice of reason sometimes. We'll have people who come in and their boss basically told them, I use this analogy all the time. It's got to be 1080p at 12 megabits. Okay, why? Because my boss, Bob, he wants it that way. By the way, if Bob's listening, I'm sorry. No, just kidding. But really, I mean, people get predisposed on what kind of technology, what kind of quality, what kind of speeds they have. Well, sometimes you really don't need low latency. So don't invest the time and resources and risk in doing an ultra low latency broadcast when an Apple HLS CDN based standard workflow will more than meet your needs. So I think it's important, while there's a lot of excitement with latency, while we have a variety of technologies and solutions to support it, ask yourself, does this person really need to see this in less than a second? If they do, well, then we'll build it. We'll put it together. We've got the route to get that. But if you don't do it just because you can. It really is. it really isn't an apples to apples comparison. Low latency requires a very intricate, specific set of technologies and configurations, while Apple HLS and going through Wowza, going through a CDN, it's exceptionally reliable and proven.
Yeah, and I guess I would add in the counter to that is there are workflows that cannot tolerate the latency. If it's something that's interactive, if it's, Tim, I know you spend a lot of time helping a company that monitors infants in the NICU, and you can't have a delay if an infant in the NICU is struggling. You don't want to wait 30 seconds to find out that that's taking place. You want to know right now, and you want to dispatch somebody in to take care of that child. So I completely agree, Tim, that if low latency is not needed, and there's low latency and low latency. You could have, for some, low latency is 1 second. For others, low latency is 3 seconds. For others, it's 7 to 8 seconds, right? So it's more than just low latency or not. It's really necessary to talk through and design a system that has a very specific level of latency based on the needs of the implementation. And certainly there are live video solutions that cannot tolerate a higher level of latency. And again, all of these things are possible. It is possible to deliver a very low latency stream. It's possible to do it at scale. It gets more complex, potentially more expensive. So it's really about striking the balance of cost and system requirements and solution requirements and complexity. And that's not always a simple equation. And again, that's a lot of what we as Wowza do to help customers find the balance and to find a solution that checks all the boxes and really meets the needs. So
awesome. And Justin, if you could go to the next slide. This is actually, Chris was just mentioning a company that helps monitoring neonates in the ICU, and Child Health Imprints is the name of that organization. And Tim, I know you worked with them. They partnered with Wowza's professional services team to really ensure that low latency, since really we're talking about life critical decision making at this point. And so could you kind of explain how we were able to help them with this low latency monitoring and synchronization of clinical data with video, and even regulatory compliance?
Oh, absolutely. Child Health Imprints is the coolest thing I think I've worked on in a long time with regard to streaming. It's incredible what they're doing. They are serving people in developing nations, not all developing nations. I know they're in Japan, and of course they're working in the US, but primarily their focus is regions of the world that have babies that are born prematurely, which has a staggering death rate because there aren't the facilities and the clinics to handle, and particularly the doctors and that expertise to handle caring for these premature infants. And so what they developed in their business was this amazing way to monitor every aspect of the NICU and transfer that data back to a central location. In fact, in other parts of the world where there are an abundance of doctors who can monitor and give advice and learn from what's happening in these environments. So they began their business by watching all of the data points, and then they realized, wow, if we could actually see them, how incredible would that be? And then they can start measuring when the baby's touched, when the diapers change, when it's fed, and they can monitor all their other data. It's very intricate, very specialized, but they were trying to invent their own streaming platform, and they caught themselves and they realized, you know what? We're good at Java. We're really good at data. We're really good at all these aspects of our business, but we got a lot to learn when it comes to video. And so by a stroke of good fortune, I would say, we got onto the phone with them and we had a conversation about how you can leverage Wowza's streaming engine. You can scale, you can use protocols like SRT to reliably distribute data from, imagine a very remote clinic where the internet infrastructure is limited, but you have this environment where they've got to get this video out to a monitoring I want to say a center so that these doctors can see it. So they're using WebRTC that is transported by SRT from the clinic. So it goes from the clinic as SRT from this very small form factor encoder, goes across the world, gets into a Wowza streaming engine it's a NOC basically in somewhere in Asia. And they convert that into WebRTC. So you're viewing it at ultra low latency. and the doctors are able to functionally provide guidance to nurses and parents and staff that are monitoring these babies in these remote environments. And it's just tremendous because it's such a life-changing application. We're dealing with some of the most precious aspect of a parent's life is their child. And so it's very rewarding to see how using a low latency solution, overcoming infrastructure issues, empowering doctors to expand the territory for which they can care, helping people in areas where they don't have access to doctors. It's just amazing how Wowza Professional Services, our engine product, we got out there and helped them monitor. We've got everything integrated. It's just an overall win-win situation for everybody getting that put together.
And by the way, there's a question that came in regarding this because they were very curious how they're converting to WebRTC. I think Daniel's under the impression that Wowza Streaming Cloud doesn't provide WebRTC output.
Yeah, that's correct, and that's a great question because it gives us the opportunity to differentiate. Wowza Streaming Cloud distributes Apple HLS. It is a CDN-based component. That's what it does. It's designed for large scale audiences. Wowza Streaming Engine is very malleable. There's a whole litany of protocols that it supports, and one would be, of course, WebRTC out. So in this use case, we're taking SRT in, leveraging, capitalizing on the benefits of SRT. It comes across, and then we package it so that it can be viewed as a WebRTC stream in a browser like Google Chrome. So it's quite simple what's happening on the server, but it is good. It is a good observation that while cloud can intake WebRTC, in fact, we recently implemented this, and we actually have browser components that you can use a wowza.com based browser and encode audio and video into cloud, but the distribution of it, of course, is still intended for HTTP via CDN.
And Tim, maybe I don't know if this is necessary, but just to be clear, so Wowza Streaming Cloud is a platform for live streaming that Wowza has built and operates and offers to customers. And then differently, Wowza Streaming Engine is a piece of software that has been a Wowza product for 11 or 12 years now, very, very mature, very robust. But that's self-hosted software. So that's software that would live on a server, whether it's a physical server or a virtual server. Wowza Streaming Cloud is built on Wowza Streaming Engine, but they're two different products that serve, obviously in this case, two different needs, and not all the capabilities of Engine are necessarily in cloud. We will continue to drive more capability into cloud since it does operate and is supported by the Engine product. But those are two different products. Engine is software, cloud is a platform and a service.
Thank you. And so just to confirm for Daniel, yes, so we're talking about Engine in this case, not cloud.
Correct.
And from there, Justin, if you want to go to the next slide, I think that's a good segue into basically the age-old build versus buy debate, and that we're talking about this more customizable software we have, Wowza Streaming Engine, versus a quicker to deploy Wowza Streaming Cloud product, or service. And then also we've been discussing throughout this webinar kind of professional services and how that can help speed up deployment in these cases and solve for some of the traditional cons of building a solution in-house. So Tim and Chris, when you have customers coming in and they're kind of struggling with build versus buy in their streaming deployment, what do you think are the pros and cons of each, and how can they strike a balance by leveraging our product portfolio and our expertise?
Sure. I'll start, Tim. Once again, I'll let you give better detail. But certainly there are factors in creating a live streaming solution that would inform using a service and a platform as opposed to using self-hosted software. So many of those considerations, we've talked about security, we've talked about being on-prem and behind a firewall. Those types of requirements would lend themselves more to building and using software as opposed to leveraging Wowza Streaming Cloud or any other type of streaming service. Speed is typically, if somebody needs to be live streaming at scale tomorrow, if somebody came to me and said, I need to be serving an audience of 100,000 and my event is tomorrow, the answer would be pretty clear. Leveraging the service, let's leverage Wowza Streaming Cloud. So speed and scale typically can push more to cloud, although speed and scale can also be leveraged in the build side. But in that context, probably more Wowza help would be needed, depending on the streaming expertise of the customer. So, it's really about, and we've talked about this throughout this webinar, using the right tool for the job and selecting the right Wowza product to meet the requirements of the customer. And sometimes it's pretty clear, sometimes it could go either way. The entire Wowza team is there to help guide customers through those decisions, because the wrong decision early on, if a customer is self-serving, could create problems down the road. Certainly in building, there is the need to host servers. There's going to be more work in maintaining a server farm potentially. Obviously, that's a little bit easier if it's virtual servers through one of the many cloud hosting environments. But there still is a little bit more overhead in building. But when you're building, as opposed to leveraging a service, you have a lot more control and you can do a lot more customization. You have a lot more. An example would be streaming through YouTube Live. Obviously, YouTube Live has branding of YouTube and potentially ads and things that are part of the YouTube experience. Whereas going through Wowza Streaming Engine or even Wowza Streaming Cloud provides the customer with a lot more ability to make the user experience be skinned and tuned in a way that they can control. So it's a trade-off. There's lots of considerations. Security, control, firewalls could lean more toward building, and speed and scale could push toward buying. In this case, if we're talking about Wowza Streaming Cloud. And then there are very specific, again, latency requirements, paywall, things like that could also inform that decision. And it's not always an easy decision. It's not always clear, but we're here to help, and we have a lot of experience in ensuring that customers select the right product. Tim?
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment on that. I think it has a lot to do with the vision and approach for your business model. You might be surprised that when I get posed with the question, should I use Vimeo? Should I use YouTube? Well, in some cases, that's actually better for some people. But in other cases, the vision for the business may be, they want to become the next Vimeo. They want to become the next Periscope, something of that nature. We see this all the time in fitness and in various verticals. So I think it's important to recognize, if you need to use a service, and by the way, many of these services are supported by Wowza Streaming Engine. They are our customers of ours. So I feel really good making recommendations to particular video platforms. But if your vision is, I want to set my own policy, I want to control every aspect of this, I want to grow it, I want to, I want to start small and become big someday, I think that's a compelling argument to build. Whereas if you really just need to provide auxiliary streaming, a service that is that is provided by a third party is fine for you. We support that as well. And there can be some things that we can do as far as encoding. For example, our Clearcaster appliance is exceptional for pushing into all sorts of RTMP capable and SRT capable platforms. So, again, as you'll see with video, there are always multiple options. But if you want to own this and create it and evolve it on your own terms, building is really the way to go.
Awesome. And then Justin, I know we're running out of time. Are there any questions that we want to cover here before we wrap this up?
There are several questions that are in. I think some of them would be great if we could answer them. If you want me to bring them up now, for example, Rajiv wants to know basically what we can do or what our capabilities with mobile devices when it comes to Wowza Streaming Cloud. I don't think we've talked sort of about, say, using WebRTC as an example for going through browsers, but, nothing in terms of, say, streaming out to someone's mobile device.
Yeah, I'll answer that. It's a quick answer. Apple HLS is the primary protocol that Wowza Streaming Cloud distributes. You can literally take an M3U8 URL that is presented to you when you create a streaming cloud, drop it in any browser on iOS or Android, and it'll play in the native player. So I would like to say that we have a maximum compatibility with mobile, and we're proud to have quite a group of customers who use Wowza Cloud every day for mobile device streaming.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'll just so and that applies both on the broadcast side, as in broadcasting from a mobile device, as well as having viewership on a mobile device. I personally use Wowza Streaming Cloud to do some of my own broadcasting. It's very quick, very easy. I happen to use the GoCoder app from Wowza, but there's many technologies that can send a stream from a mobile device into Wowza Streaming Cloud. We're happy to help, guide if advice is needed there. But yes, mobile is a very common use of Wowza Streaming Cloud, as well as Engine, but Wowza Streaming Cloud for both the production and distribution of video on the input and the output side.
Right, and generally for
Broadcasting
that,
and
it's
viewing.
like we're usually talking about our TMP, because I mean, there's a bunch of switching software out there also to go between one camera to another that I love to use, and it's all RTMP into Wowza Streaming Cloud. Going back to some earlier questions that we had, Jim was trying to verify that Wowza can provide a fixed IP server in the cloud for split tunneling for static targets.
Yeah, I'll answer that. If you're using Wowza Engine in a service like Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS or your own hosting provider, you certainly can use a static IP. But another cool thing that CDNs do is they give you an API that actually can you give it the API command, and then the result of that are all of the domains and IP based information that you would need to update your split tunnel VPN configuration. And that's a very important aspect of setting that up. I don't want to oversimplify it, but outbound firewall rules governing which domains go to your local router on site versus allowing someone at home to switch effectively like a fork in the road and go somewhere on the internet. High security applications, high security environments, they don't give unlimited access to the internet. So they have to be very specific on where they allow their users to go. So to answer that question, that information is available from the CDN. In our case, we're using Fastly CDN, who freely make that available. It's not difficult to do. And then, of course, if you're using Wowza Streaming Engine in a hosted provider, you have total control over your IP addressing.
Awesome. And Jim, I see some other comments you made, which might have been in reference to an earlier conversation. If you want to, if you have other questions, please feel free to contact us. I'm not really sure if we can, I'm not really sure what the unicast streams that you were referring to were. I will say we have another question from Raj that's, and I know, Chris, you said earlier today you're going to have to respond to this, so I'm going to just say it. He's trying to understand the pricing in
Sure.
terms of building their service. And, he'd love to talk with somebody. They're basically trying to build a Zoom-like service, and, they'd like to figure out whether Wowza is a good fit.
Yeah, so I was gonna type an answer, but I'm glad I'll take this. So certainly your question is, can you connect with someone over a call? Absolutely. You can email sales@wowza.com. You can give me your information through this webinar and I can get you hooked up with the right people. But yeah, we are more than happy to consult with you. People like Tim every single day spend their days talking to customers, helping them figure out what a solution could look like, what it would cost, what it would take to implement, if any help is needed from a professional services standpoint. So yes, you can either send me your information through this webinar. At minimum, you can email sales@wowza.com. They will get on the phone with you. They will talk to you, help guide you in what can be done, how easily things can be done, what things will cost. We do that every day, and we're here for you.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's it, Tracy.
Okay, well, we're out of time, so if you just want to go to the next slide. Again, the report that we were presenting on can be found at this link, and I just posted it to the chat as well. it's much more robust. We only covered just a very high level discussion today. So I really encourage everybody to go take a look. And I just want to thank everybody for joining today, and also Chris, Tim, and Justin for the insightful conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Peter, I will get you hooked up as well. I see your question there as well.